Hi, I'm Rick Dior, and today we're going to talk about playing relaxed on the drum set while playing heavy, in other words, loud. So I teach lots and lots of students, and over these past 45 years, all the years that I've been teaching, the biggest issue I've come across are players who play really tight. In other words, their bodies might be naturally tight, and that goes right onto the drum set. Or even when they're playing snare drum or any other of the percussion instruments, they're coming from the shoulder and not relaxing their arms and hands. And, when I see a new student for the first time, I'll ask them to play a few different stickings and maybe some rolls, or if they're not very experienced, just do single strokes like this. And most often I see them doing this. So they're holding on to the stick like it's some sort of tool for hitting something. So now, of course, that's instinct. We're born like that because we're tool users. If you give a little kid a stick, they'll grab it like this, with a fist and hit something with it. So you have to kind of unlearn that if you want to be able to play the drums. So using the fingers, wrist, with a loose wrist, and not coming from the shoulder. So with all my students, I work on exercises. Even if they're loose, we work on things to get them to be able to use their bodies correctly in this manner so they can play for many, many years injury-free. And many of my students have had prior injuries, and that's why they're coming to me, because they want to fix them. Injuries with their shoulders, with their elbows, with carpal tunnel syndrome, with tendinitis, all kinds of stuff. And it's extremely common. To avoid these, you need to learn how to not use your body in an impactful way where it wears out. Just like if you're a carpenter and you use a hammer, these days most carpenters are using nail guns, but even they pose risks with the lifting and the repetitive motions, and that sometimes rears its head in a tennis elbow situation, so tendinitis right here. So the whole idea is to let the stick bounce at all times. You saw in that opening demo I was doing lots of different techniques. I was playing match grip, I was playing traditional, I was using a wrist stroke, but sort of a shaft tip like this. Instead of this, I also was using some push-pull, which is this. So those are all relaxed techniques that don't use a lot of physical energy. In other words, you're not coming from your neck or your shoulder to do that. You're just using the weight of the stick. Now let's talk about that for a second, because the weight of the stick is important. It's important not to use sticks too light if you're a big person. I weigh about 160 pounds, which is not real heavy, and I'm about 5'7". So for me, a good weight is about 55 to 60 grams for a drum set stick. Anything lighter, I feel like I have to work really hard. So if I was using like a 7A, I feel like I'm having to use way more energy than I normally do. So a stick that I use, which is my drum set stick, is 55 to 60 grams, depending on the wood, if it's maple or hickory. So that's a big thing. That way the stick can bounce. And if you just drop it, it can be loud. A lot of the gigs today are loud, and they've been that way since, the beginnings of rock and roll in the 50s. So a lot of drummers have to play very, very loud, and even when they're mic'd, they're playing loud. Now, when you're playing jazz gigs, that technique's a little bit different. So that technique is lighter, so you're not having to use as much force. So you can use a lighter stick, but once again, I don't really use anything under 50 grams for that because the cymbals sound better with a little more weight. So that's step number one. Use a little bit of a heavier stick when you're playing. Now the other thing is, whether you're playing traditional or matched, and both grips are great, and I suggest learning them both. You need to be able to not be tight in your grip, so you don't squeeze, okay? The stick is always loose and moving. If you have to do quick things like this, that's just bouncing, and that's just fingers, and my grip is very loose. If you drop a stick, pick up another one. I always keep some nearby here. I guess I'm taking a risk today because I'm just using these two. But, you know, you'll find over time that that stick will find a home here, and you will not lose sticks. I rarely drop sticks. But if you're worried about that, you can always, like I said, keep extra sticks. But you don't want to squeeze. If you're squeezing hard, that means you're tight, and that travels up your arm and creates problems, which you don't want. So the main thing to do is relax in that grip. Now for traditional, you don't want to play with your thumb locked on this first finger. See a lot of people doing that like this. That's not going to get you anywhere. And that's fine if you're just doing this. But if you're playing anything with ghosting like this, you got a need for that stick to be able to move. So you apply a little bit of pressure with the thumb, and then these fingers take up the slack, and then these bottom fingers will regulate. So the top fingers and the bottom fingers regulate the motion of the stick. Don't play with your fingers off, although when you do accents like this, you can do what I call a clench or a grab where you're doing that. But that's mostly thumb, and you can get lots and lots of speed. You can see all that ghosting there that's going on with that left hand. Now for for a match grip, you're just going to let that stick bounce just like the right hand, not a tight grip. So again, for the ghosting, it's a bounce. Don't try to use your wrist like this for the ghosting. You want to let the stick bounce. All right, so I am just doing a whip stroke there instead of doing the tight wrist. So one of the things that I see right away from a lot of players is this kind of thing, where they're using their shoulder, okay? You want to avoid that. Now, to avoid that, you sit down and you put your arms at your sides and you just relax your arms like spaghetti. And then you bring up your hands and retain that relaxation. Find yourself getting tight again, you do it again. And you keep working on that until you can maintain that, and you start playing really simple. And toy around with some little ghost notes like I'm doing there. Now you'll see on my right hand where I'm just basically doing a shaft tip motion. And I'm always making sure my shoulders are completely relaxed. All right? As far as sitting up straight, you should try to do it. But it doesn't need to be ramrod straight like that. You can, again, relax like this and put the weight on your torso so you're not trying to, support yourself with your legs. And those need to be relaxed as well. So I have several videos on bass drum technique. I suggest you look at those, as well as hi-hat technique on this channel. You'll see how I relax my feet doing a basic heel-toe motion with my foot. And it's very important not to leave the beater in the head, again, because you got to take it out, and that's a forced, tense stroke. The last thing I want to talk about today are drummers who leave the stick in the head. That's pretty common. So I see guys play like this. I once taught a guy who was a very good drummer, played lots of gigs all the time, but he had developed tendonitis in his elbow and also his wrist. It was pretty bad. And when I watched him play, he was doing exactly that. He was playing rim shots and doing this. Now, if you try that, the impact is incredible. Over time, if you do it a few times, it's not a big deal. If you do it 1,000 times, you're going to have a problem. All right? So that's something you don't want to do. If you do that, please avoid it. So you want to just let that stick bounce off the head. As far as a rim shot, the same thing. With the traditional grip, the only other thing I would mention are the different hi-hat techniques, which I've done videos on already. But let's go over those once again. So you have a shaft tip technique, which is this. And then you have the drop technique, which is this. And that's a push-pull technique. I have several videos on that. And what you're doing is you're dropping the stick and you're pushing down with your fingers. Very, very useful, especially when you're playing Brazilian styles. All right? You can do this. That's what I call stiff wrist playing. That's okay if you're playing like a lot of Beatles and stuff like that, older rock and roll. That's sort of the sound where every note is accented on the hi-hat. The thing about that is you're not playing from your shoulder. Once again, you're playing from your wrist. You're not doing this. Okay, so that's a big thing. And also, it doesn't sound good either. So I hope this helps with a lot of the questions I get about this, and I'll refer my own students to this video when we're talking about this subject, which seems to be pretty much every lesson. So I'll play a little, and we'll call it a day.